Podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
We are recording this on March 24th. There is 3 weeks left in the season. 3 weeks from yesterday, right?
Yep.
I think the season officially wraps up for the Utah Jazz. That will be April 13th. As always, find us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops, at Holt Sports. You can also read us at Blue Sky there, and to catch all of our coverage and work at KSLSports.com. Appreciate everyone who listens regularly. If you're a first-timer, appreciate that as well. We do this every week, trying to update you on the latest with the Utah Jazz when there's really important things happening, which has not been the case for the Utah Jazz this season. We're only doing one a week, but occasionally we will do more than one, but that hasn't happened in a little bit. But as we get closer to the draft, et cetera, I imagine, with the lottery, there will probably be some emergency pods that we will plan to do, which thus means it's not actually an emergency because we're planning to do it.
Yes.
But all right, Jazz sit at 16 and 56. We like to review their latest week, their upcoming week, any news, which is not really news this week. And then we will get your mailbag questions.
The last week for the Jazz, a 1-3 week, started with a loss to Chicago, 111-97. That was the 10th loss in a row, I believe, for the Jazz, and that was their longest of the season. It was already the longest of the season. Before that, it was 8 games. Then they finally snapped it with a win over the Wizards, 128-112. Standings-wise, that was kind of a painful win, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then to end off the week, a loss to Boston, 121-99, and then last night, lost to Cleveland, 120-91.
The win over Washington, I know, probably had a couple of fans wringing their hands. I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
The truth was, if you didn't beat Washington, when were you going to win again?
True.
You might have been on a 16 or 17 game losing streak, and then I think really you lose the guys. And I think you're already getting to the point where, there's some checkout. You're not seeing it on the court so much, but, Walker's taking 8 threes a game. Yeah. And it's by design. They're trying to get him to shoot threes, but, he knows that means he doesn't have to work as hard to, go bang around down low with, Jared Allen and Evan Mobley last night. That makes his life a little bit easier.
Looking at this past week of games, first of all, Kessler has played awesome. He has continued. He is probably the most improved player for the Jazz this year. You could argue for John Collins, but I feel like we haven't seen a lot of John Collins since the new year, basically.
Right. Yeah.
But another thing I want to point out, in the last week, in every game except for last night, Keontae George was one of the top 2 scorers for the Jazz. And ever since being pushed to that bench role, this was something they talked about on the broadcast last night. It is by no means a punishment or a bad thing or anything for Keontae. It's just in reality, at some point in his career, that's probably the role that he may fill out to be. And it's just, he's still playing a lot of minutes. There's absolutely no shot at him. And I wanted to talk about some stats for Keontae that I looked at, some advanced stats. First of all, he is jumped from 26th to 91st percentile in assist percentage.
Okay.
So I feel like in year 1, they tried him out as a point guard, even though he may be an off guard.
And early on, his assist numbers were super high, and then he started having to score more, and the assists really dropped off.
Yes. But I just feel like he probably will, throughout the entirety of his career, end up being a 2-guard who is a quality playmaker at that position. And the Jazz testing him out at point guard last year seemed to work. And then also, almost all of his efficiencies have jumped 35th to 68th percentile at the rim.
Yep.
That's something we've talked about a lot for Keontae, getting to the rim, not just settling for threes. But even then, 28th to 92nd percentile corner threes. I just feel like his stats haven't necessarily jumped off the page as a most improved type of player for the Jazz, but so many little things are looking a lot better. And I feel like at some points last year, maybe even early this year, when he has gone through struggles, we're like, what does Keontae's future in the NBA look like? I feel like he has solidified a lot of those questions.
I totally agree. There are obviously issues with Keontae.
Yes.
Right? He's got to become a much better defensive player.
Yes.
He still ball watches. He still gets guys who just back cut him if he's defending on the baseline and he just doesn't see it at all and he misses rotations. The issues are pretty obvious what he does wrong. It has begun to cloud how we view him as a 21-year-old. Again, he was doing an interview the other day with a guy from The Athletic. They were doing some stuff that I don't exactly need. I don't know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then the guy came over from The Athletic and talked to us, and it was not Tony Jones. Okay. Just so you know. And they were like, he's like, yeah, it's just so weird. And we're like, what? He's like, Keontae graduated high school in 2022. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he went to college for 2022, 2023. It's like 2022 was a weekend ago. You know, like it's easy to forget that these guys are children.
Yes.
Essentially. And he's 21. He's a man. But like he is so young, and the thought that we would know what he is or what he's going to be or what he's not going to get better at is so silly. And a lot of it is he is just the victim of playing a similar position as Donovan Mitchell, and Donovan was spectacular right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that coming up before the end of the show, not because Donovan was in town last night, but because I think it addresses some mailbag questions. But we are so jaded by what to expect from young players because Donovan Mitchell came in and is the 5th best player in franchise history and was really good from day one, that we aren't giving other good players or other players a chance to become good players because they are not living up to that expectation so early in their career.
Yeah.
And to your point, like, it's really weird to me to want to flush Keontae George, who, and this is since moving to the bench, but even before that, like, his numbers for the season are fine. Since moving to the bench, he's averaging 17 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, which 4 rebounds for a guard is a very good number, especially coming off the bench. And he's shooting 40% from the floor and 35% from 3. And I'm not rounding up on any of those.
Yeah.
He's now over the 40% threshold from the floor since moving to the second unit. And he's over 35% from the 3-point line. Like, the league is littered with 40%, 35% guys. I know you look at under 40 from both the floor and the 3-point line, and you think, like, oh, it's a really inefficient shooter. And it's just our funny brain that we're like, oh, 39%. It's like, it's one person. It's one shot of 100 to get to 40. Like, and if it's 42 next year or 43 next year, like, all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's actually a pretty good player. Like, this is actually a pretty decent player. And I could try and pull it up on StatHead quickly and look at players in the first, 3 years of their careers who played guard. Like, I'm sure it's littered with guys who were right around there, and weren't shooting way better that ended up going on to have these really long NBA careers. So I would really, really, really hesitate backing away from players as productive as Keontae are because there are a couple of, like, loud stats that aren't in their favor.
Yeah,
I would just really, really be careful with that.
Part of the reason I brought all of this up is because not even just from Utah Jazz fans, but I've seen a lot of people who give reports on the tank race, the reverse standings, whatever you want to call it, and they're like, yeah, it makes sense for the Jazz to be doing what they're doing because they don't have that young guy, right? Like the Orlando Magic have Paolo, the Spurs have Victor Wembanyama, and yeah, the Jazz don't have someone they look at as like, this is our franchise guy going forward, but I feel like Jazz fans get caught up in that. Like, for example, Cody Williams had let's not sugarcoat it. He had a rough night last night.
Yeah,
like his first 2 3-pointers were air balls. I think he airballed 1 or 2 more times throughout the games. But it's like, I used Keontae as an example because he's improving, even though when you look at his points, assists, rebounds, shooting percentage, it isn't a crazy improvement.
It's not a radical spike.
Yes, it's like every game these guys are getting better, and you can't rule them out on a game, a week, a month, even a rookie season. So that's really the point that I had with bringing those stats in.
So I ran it through StatHead. Players who shot 40% from the floor, 35% from the 3-point line in their second year in the NBA. And that's exactly where Keontae is since coming off the bench. And then I just sorted it. So we started with guys who shot exactly 40 and worked their way up. And, of course, there are guys who shot 57%. But I'm talking about guards here. The first 5 names are Chris Duhon, Damon Stoudemire, James Harden, Luther Head, Keith Jennings. Okay, 2 of those guys played a very long time, and Damon Stoudemire and James Harden. Chris Duhon was in the league for quite a while. Then the next guy is like Aaron Brooks was in the league forever. And I get it's a little bit of a yesteryear. Like some of those guys, shooting is more critical now. But Landry Shamet, Luke Ridnour, Steph Marbury, David Wesley, Jason Richardson. Number 12 on this list is Bradley Beal. It's like, so again, it's like, just let the wine breathe a little bit. Like, man, it's going to get better. It's a green banana right now. Like the Jazz drafted a green banana, and you're like, this thing's inedible.
It tastes terrible.
Yes, correct. It does taste terrible. Yeah, you go to the Ford factory, and you're like, it's not a car. It's just a frame with 4 wheels on it. It's like, yeah, it's in step 2. You got to get to step 12 before they actually put the body on the car and put the steering wheel on. It's like, right. Yeah, it's a green banana. Like, it's fine. It's fine. And that's like, that's how I feel about Cody. That's how I feel about Isaiah. It's how I feel about Bryce Sensabaugh and Taylor Hendricks. It's just like, and that's not to say that all these bananas are going to turn out perfectly yellow.
Yes.
But, like, man, you're judging a green banana right now thinking you know what it's going to taste like in a week.
Yeah.
It's just like, relax. Absolutely relax. Relax. Especially with Keontae, who's averaging 17 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds. Like, that banana's yellowing quickly.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I get there's a bruise on it
Yes.
because of the shooting percentages. It's like, that might get better. Like, the stem's a little green still. It's going to get better. So
This is an awesome analogy.
I'm
I just wanna
totally
say.
with you. I'm just totally with you.
Yes.
It's like, just chill.
Yeah.
Just chill. Like, I had arguments in my Twitter feed about, like, what Keontae isn't and, like, what this bad percentage is. It's just like, he's played 100 games, 150 games. It's just like, so I'm with you. I'm glad you brought it up. This was not a prompt that we decided to pick, but the league is littered with guys who played like this. Manu Ginobili's second season, 41% from the floor. Rodney Hood's second season, 42% from the floor. Bradley Beal's second season, this was maybe his first year, 41%. It's just like, yeah, guys. Klay Thompson, the greatest shooter of all time, 42% from the floor. One of his first 2 years. I think this must have been his second year. Maybe it was his first. It's just like, it just takes a while. Dame, 42%. It's just like, yeah, guards, it takes a while. It just takes a little while. And Dame was 30 when he got into the NBA, right? Like, he played 2 years in Oakland and 2 years at Weber State. Just like, just let everyone ripen just a little.
Yes.
And I promise you, you will have more fun. Anyways, end of rant. But I'm glad you brought it up.
Yes.
It is worth noticing, like, I think one of the complaints I've said about Keontae George, and not complained about Keontae, complained about how Keontae is talked about, is he's improved. He's not improved the things that people wanted him to improve. He is getting much better. All the things you brought up, the assist rate, finishing inside the three-point line, like finishing at the rim, much better.
Yeah.
It's just not, he's a great defensive player and a super efficient shooter right now, which is what everyone wanted to see because, again, those are very loud things to look at. But I think things are trending in the right direction. Like, everything feels like it's trending in the right direction. And by the way, like, I think the fact that he's handled this as professionally as he has, where people last year were like, this guy might be an all-star. To this year, he's like, he might be a future bench player forever for the rest of his life. Do you know how much money that is out of his pocket? That changes from making $200 million on a contract to 80.
Yeah.
If that much. Like, it's a huge blow to your ego. And he has not become a problem. He's not asking for a trade. He's not rebelling against the coaching staff. You're not seeing any of that. The effort's still there. So I think there are promising signs. Ray Allen was a decent shooter. It's 43% his second year. It's just like, just chill. The banana is green.
Last thing I want to say on this, and then we can move on to the next week for the Utah Jazz. This applies to all of the young players for the Jazz. Like, Cody Williams just has a rough year, and I know that a lot of times we have said, like, he doesn't have an NBA body yet, and of course it's a lot more than that. Paul George averaged 7 points in 61 games in his rookie year.
I went back because I was looking at VJ Edgecombe because I'm starting to get ready for the draft a little bit. And, one of his comps is Victor Oladipo. And I was like, what did Victor Oladipo do his first year of college? It was like he literally didn't play.
Yeah.
He played 3 years in Indiana before he came a guy. I'm just like, just relax. And I'm telling myself this. I'm not telling, listeners this or anything like that. It's just like, man, it takes a long time. It just takes a while. And the Jazz tried to preempt the process by going out and getting these guys early, but like, it just takes a really long time before guys are ready to play basketball. The fact that Keontae is doing anything is a good sign.
Yes.
Because he could easily be Cody Williams. And by the way, that's not a red flag for Cody Williams either necessarily. You wish he was shooting better. Yeah, there's not a lot of historical comps that trend in his favor. And I still don't think it's a real indicator of what he's going to be 3 or 4 years from now anyways. Yep. Okay.
All right. Now we're officially done with that.
Okay, week ahead.
Week ahead for the Utah Jazz starts with, rough week, by the way, hosting the Memphis Grizzlies tomorrow, hosting the Houston Rockets on Thursday, and then back-to-back in Denver on Friday.
We were not lying, and Tankathon was not lying when it said the Jazz had, the second toughest schedule remaining. They they faced the Cavs. They get that behind them. They still have the fourth toughest schedule remaining.
Yeah.
Every game is hard. We told you, I think last week, I think it was 9 of the remaining 13 games that they had were against teams that were top 6 in their conference. So they were already going to make the playoffs. And one of the other ones was the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are trying to get into that top 6 and are truly one of the 12 best teams in the NBA, whether they're top 6 in the West or not. And you look at the rest of the teams around the league, it's just like they have easy schedules. And we'll get to Washington's coming up here in a moment. But yeah, the Jazz beating Washington was not a big deal because the rest of the schedule is so brutal. You still have OKC, you have the Rockets twice, you have the Nuggets you mentioned, you have the Grizzlies you mentioned, you have the Pacers, you have the Timberwolves. Like, those are all good teams. You have 3 relatively easy games: Charlotte, Portland and Atlanta. Atlanta just beat Golden State by 20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, Atlanta's going to be a much better team than the Jazz, and it's why I've circled the number 18 for the Jazz for a long time. Said I don't think they get to 20 for sure. Maybe they get to 19, but I think that's right where they are.
Prediction for this week, I think it's 0-3.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 0-3.
Yeah.
That's what I'm predicting most of the time.
Now we can get into a quick standing update, and then I think that'll be it for the first half. Then we'll take a break and get into your guys' mailbag questions. The Jazz are currently 16-56, which is 15th in the West still, 29th overall. They are technically tied with the Wizards, although they have one more win and one more loss. 2.5 games ahead of the Hornets, 3 games ahead of the Pelicans. I'm still adding the Hornets and Pelicans, but I think next week we can just look at the Jazz and the Wizards. I don't think that the Hornets or the Pelicans will be able to catch up to the Jazz, but I guess we will see.
The fact that the Jazz play the Hornets one more time, and they're only 2 wins back makes it possible.
True.
But you're right, 2.5 games with 11 games to play, or 10 games to play now for the Jazz, and the Jazz aren't interested in winning, probably means I don't think they're going to catch up to them. I certainly don't think they're going to catch New Orleans.
Yes.
I don't see the Jazz randomly picking up 3 wins and none of these other teams winning any.
Yes.
So, maybe you tie with the Hornets at the end of the year. I think that's still possible, but very unlikely. As you mentioned, I think far more important to look at right now is Washington and what Washington's doing.
The next week for the Wizards, as we said, tough week for the Jazz, polar opposite for the Wizards. It starts by hosting the Raptors
tonight. And Washington's favored in this game.
Yes. And then in Philadelphia, all of their best players are injured. They are trying to lose and increase their odds.
Because they have to have a top 6 pick, otherwise it goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they're at 5 right now. So they can't get jumped by 2 teams like the Jazz did in that same situation last year. They absolutely have to not just get to 6, but they probably need some breathing room because there's a high likelihood somebody is going to jump up into the top 4.
Yep.
So Philly, at all costs, is trying to lose.
Yes. And then hosting the Pacers. That is probably the most likely loss for them. And then they're going to host the Brooklyn Nets.
So of those 3, Toronto, at Philly, home against Brooklyn, you've got 3 tanking teams. Philly is really trying to tank.
Yeah.
There's a good likelihood that they're going to pick up at least 1 win. And if the Jazz go winless, then they will be tied in the standings again.
This is, again, if you look at the entirety of the year, predicting 2 wins in a week for the Wizards is kind of crazy. But there was that stretch, within the last month?
2 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
5-5.
I could totally see them winning 2 of these 3 games.
And again, to go beyond this, they play Orlando, they play Chicago, and Chicago's playing better, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They play Miami twice. Miami is dreadful.
Terrible.
They play Brooklyn. Oh, they play 76ers twice.
Yes.
So, even if it's not this week, it'll be next week.
Yep.
And again, I think the Jazz might win 2 more games.
Yeah.
So I really do think the Jazz are probably going to finish with the worst record. Maybe they're tied with Washington, and it comes down to a coin flip for who would be number 1 if everything went in order, or I guess who would fall to 6 if everything fell in order and 4 teams jumped them. But even then, that's just not going to matter at that point.
Just real quick, we can talk about the Hornets and Pelicans as well. The Hornets host the Magic, they host the Raptors, and then biggest one of the next week, the Pelicans and the Hornets play each other.
Oh, great.
I think if the Hornets win that game, then it really does just erase 3 and 4 from the conversation when looking at the Jazz's standings.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, New Orleans plays the 76ers one more time.
Yeah.
76ers are absolutely going to lose that game. They still play Brooklyn. And then Charlotte plays the Jazz. The Pelicans, you mentioned, they play the Raptors twice, the Bulls once, and the Magic once. So there's just wins on the board. There are wins out there to be had, and very few for the Jazz because the Jazz aren't trying and the teams they're playing against are.
Yes.
And that's really the best combination. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will get to your mailbag questions. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt. All right, as always, we like to send out it's not a prompt because I'm not telling you what to ask questions about other than ask questions about the Jazz and the NBA, so it's kind of a prompt. 11 o'clock every Monday. I send it out on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ben's Hoops. Also follow Chandler at C Holt Sports. And you just respond to that, and we will get it in the mailbag. But also, my DMs are open on Twitter and Instagram and Blue Sky. I think they're open on Blue Sky. I don't know how you do that. And your DMs are open, too, so you can always reach out to us. Or just tweet at us, whatever.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a DM. And here's the thing. I think some people might be a little bit nervous about DMing. You don't have to be.
No,
I get a bunch of DMs that are just hey, here's 3 questions for the next mailbag, and I'll pick one.
Yeah.
You don't need to feel like it's some intimate thing. It's not. It's we're super happy to have him. So we'll go quickly with Sammy Paradise. He says, I clicked away from it. He says, are you having fun covering a team that's really bottoming out? As a fan, I'm actually starting to have a good time with it. I just have the best job in the world, so I'm always having a good time at my job. I was such a huge basketball junkie in 2002, 2003, 2004. Like, I listened to sports radio all day long. I wasn't listening to music in my car. I was watching the Detroit Pistons and the San Antonio Spurs every Thursday night at my friend Taylor's house, like, because he had cable and I didn't. And so I just went to his house to watch the games. Just every NBA game I could. If you would have told me then, 21 years ago, that this would be my job, I would have been like, how many people did I murder to get here? What crimes did I commit to get rid of the other people in front of me who are supposed to have this job that allowed me to do it? So I would have killed to have this job, and so I'm thrilled to have it. So I'm always having fun, Sammy. Another thing I have realized, I like covering guys on the ascent of their careers or the descent of their careers, trying to figure out how to stick around and how to be valuable. Mm-hmm. And I am a little less intrigued by the guy who's like just in his prime and is awesome. Yeah. Because I know what the story is. Like, you're just awesome. Cool. Yeah, you do exactly what I expect you to do. You're awesome. But it's like, Keontae is a really fun story for me right now because it's like this kid who has so much talent. Keontae's crazy talented. Like, he can do everything with a basketball. Can he do it consistently enough that it moves the needle? So I love figuring it out. I love seeing his trajectory. I love seeing how he adjusts. I love seeing how he deals with adversity. I love seeing how he addresses people who question him. Same thing with Cody. Same thing with Walker over the last 2 years. Yep. And then on the flip side, I love, like, Jordan Clarkson, old cowboy, the Wild West has come. He's past his prime. How is Jordan Clarkson trying to figure out how to stick around in the NBA? I think that's equally cool. And like his evolution into like, you know what? I'm the best teammate. Everyone loves me. I treat people well. I'm good to the media. I still have big games every once in a while. It's not every night. But I still can do these things that like make me valuable. I can still win a gunfight every once in a while. It's like, that's cool to me. I love that stuff. So Sammy, to your point of like covering a bad teams are filled with cowboys trying to still run the West or young guys trying to come up and take it from them. Yeah. So I love that part of rebuilding teams. I really love that.
Yeah. And to hop in on this as well, one, just like Ben, I just love basketball. I love all forms of basketball. So being able to watch and write and talk about basketball for a living is absolutely a dream. And on top of that, something I have talked to Ben about is I'm still very young in my career, and I had told him that throughout my career, I want to cover every single stage that a team is in. I want to cover a rebuilding team. I want to cover a contending team. I want to cover a team that buying, selling, everything. Right. So I'm getting that first checkbox right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is the first one. Yes. You just strike one off the list. Yep. So, and that's a part of it. And it is fun, and they're all fun. Then they're all interesting, and because I'm not emotionally invested in the team, and I mean that honestly, and I don't mean that as in like I'm checked out or I don't care. Like, I care about my job and the people I work with who are members of the Jazz, whether it's coaches, front office, PR people, like, you know what I mean? Like, the conversations I have are like with Derek Garduno, who runs the Jazz PR stuff. Like, he's who I talk to after games. It's not just like me and Will Hardy sitting in a room. That's not happening, you know? So like, it's all of it. I like all of it. I like all the people I talk to. So that's, I guess, what I would throw out there is, you know, why it's always fun. And you know, like, the people are there regardless of how the team plays on the floor. Yes. Right? You know, like the employees that are there that I talk to and you build relationships with, and they're huge Jazz fans or they're not Jazz fans, but they've got this job. That's a part of the process as well. So anyway, neither here nor there.
One more question about more us, and then we'll get into some Jazz questions. Riley O'Brien says, Ben and Chandler, you guys do an excellent job on this podcast. My question for you both is, what is your single favorite aspect of doing this podcast?
I love the mailbag. Yep. And here's what I really like about the mailbag. So what we're pulling from is just a bag of information that we have collected, right? Yes. Like, I go and I talk to the Jazz and I talk to all these people and I watch the games and I collect all this information. I actually don't know what I have revealed. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think I've tried to do as much as I can. I try and tell you everything that's pertinent. And when I get a mailbag question, I'm like, I know the answer. I would have sworn I would have said it already. There's a really good chance I didn't. Because you have 1,000 things that you've collected, 5 things you feel like are important at any given time, and you just play those over and over and over, and you realize, there's 995 other things you've neglected to pull out of the bag. Yep. And so I love the mailbag as like the ability to like, I remember this. I've asked about this. Let me go find that quote and I'll pull it up. So I actually really like that aspect of the mailbag of it.
For me, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I'm relatively young in my career. Most of my work up until now has been writing centric, if not all of it. So I love being able to come and talk about basketball.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I would say, to point something out more specifically, is the little following that we've built. Like, I love in the mailbag, for example, seeing the same names. From guys asking
Sammy
questions.
Paradise, Riley. Like, yes, we recognize you.
Yes.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's flattering.
Yeah.
It's extremely flattering. So the ability to do it is fun. So appreciate everyone who follows up. All right, other questions that are not about us.
Yes. Danny Boy, there have been a few reports of players the team tried to target via trade that got shut down by the player not wanting to extend here. Has that been surprising to the FO, or how has that impacted how the front office views their options to improve the team?
I think it probably resets a little bit. Like, you kick the tires on Brandon Ingram, and Brandon said, I don't want to sign there, and then he signs a deal in Toronto. It's got to be a little shocking if you're a Jazz fan. It's like, you want way higher taxes and an equally cold environment?
Yeah.
I get they've won a title somewhat recently, and they're closer to winning than the Jazz are. I think, they've got a really good young player in Scotty Barnes, so maybe that's intriguing. Or maybe the Jazz just said, hey, this is the contract that we have for you. We're not going to give you whatever the Raptors ended up giving him, and he said, okay, I'm more interested in that. And he just wanted to wait until the time came, until it actually got there. Look, everyone has a preferred list of trade destinations until those teams say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if it got to a point where the Jazz went back and revisited Brandon Ingram at the trade deadline, I think by that point it was way too far down the road to actually have interest in trying to fix something this season with a veteran like that. He might have been more interested in the Jazz. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe he wouldn't have, but at the trade deadline, he may have reconsidered and been like, oh, the Knicks aren't trading for me, the Lakers aren't trading for me, the Magic, the Heat, all these teams that I may have wanted to go live in those cities aren't trading for me. Maybe Utah's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
So that type of stuff happens. Drew Holiday, his agent wanted him to go to Boston, so he goes to Boston. It's some of that stuff does happen. I bet that's frustrating for the Jazz, especially if you feel like you have a better trade package, but I'm sure they're very realistic about trying to sell the mountains and trying to sell cold weather, and other teams are trying to sell, championships or history and things that the Jazz don't have.
Yep.
So I don't think they're caught off guard by it. I think you recognize you're always fighting a little bit with one hand tied behind your back.
Next question from Positive Jazz Guy Nate Dogg. I have a question about G League and two-way contracts. So Oscar played 2 games in a day. I'm curious, does he get paid extra for that? When a player is called up, does he get paid X amount for each NBA game? If so, how much? Or is he doing it just to get NBA playing experience?
So you get pro rata for your two-way contract, and you can play X amount of days, but you can earn up to whatever it is, $500,000. It's half of the rookie minimum, or I think is what it is. So you can earn as much as that for every day that you're just under contract, I think. It's the under contract for 2 ways. It's not necessarily the days you're called up to the NBA the way it used to be. Now, you can still only play 50 games or whatever it is, but I don't think you get paid $10,000 for being a part of the team for that game. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
I do know you get paid by the day, but I don't know if it's by the game necessarily of how you're played. Now, I guess it's possible that's the case. You know what I mean? If games played and why you would have 50 games available and you get paid roughly $10,000 per game. I guess that's possible. I don't know, in all honesty. I think it's just you're under contract for X amount of days and you can exhaust that, but it's for the season. Your $500,000 is for the season length. It's not for the day length.
Okay.
So did that make sense? Did I lay that out correctly? I think I did.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Next up from Widow and Dryly, what is a flip ceiling comp?
Nas Reed's a name I've been bringing up a lot lately, which is kind of funny because they have to go different directions with their bodies. Like Nas Reed was a huge person at LSU. They're like, this guy's just so sloppy.
Yeah.
And now you look at him, it's like he looks like he had a skinny guy body and got bigger. He doesn't look like he had a big guy body that slimmed down.
Yep.
Flip's got to get bigger. I'm just curious how big they want him to get. And a big question is, who's he going to guard?
True.
I actually think he moves his feet really well. He's pretty soft on the interior right now defensively, and I could go back and read my scouting report on him. The closer he gets to the rim, the worse defender he gets.
Yeah.
He's actually a little bit better away from the rim. So how do you maximize that? It's like explosion in the legs, to make sure he's got lateral movement and could also jump to contest. Those are some questions I think he's going to have to avoid being a tweener. But even John Collins, who is a definite tweener, John's much better at the rim than Kyle is, but he's worse away from the rim. So I think you probably trend Kyle a little bit more towards that. But Nas Reed's not some crazy defender either. I would really warn people against that. He's got good defensive players around him. if he played for the Jazz, I think he would have a reputation as being a bad defender.
Yeah.
But because Ant's a great defender, McDaniels is a really good defender, Nikhil's a really good defender, Rudy is a really good defender, he probably gets a little bit of a pass.
Yeah.
But, you're a six-man because you're not great both ways, and I think that's where that's kind of the comp I would make. Now, they're not identical players. No one's identical, but he can handle it a little bit, he can shoot a little bit, he can mix it up down low a little bit. He's taller than Naz Reid is, so that's the type of player I'm thinking.
Next question from Tiefers. The next year is going to feel a lot like this year. Messaging from the team is pretty clear. What events or conditions would change that plan?
Any million of things.
Yes.
Again, to go back, so this is where I brought up Donovan Mitchell earlier in the podcast. It's like, we have to go back and not rewrite history. We did not think Donovan Mitchell was going to average 20 points per game and somewhat decent efficiency. Not great efficiency, but somewhat playable efficiency. We just didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Gordon Hayward leaves on the 4th of July, a week after the Jazz had drafted Donovan Mitchell, actually. But Donovan steps in like gangbusters, and all of a sudden the Jazz were ready to continue to win. Everybody thought the Jazz lost George Hill that year. That's why they brought Ricky Rubio in, and they lost Gordon Hayward. Like, they lost two starters, and at that point, I'm not sure people remember, like, George Hill was probably the Jazz's second or third best player, and they lost their best player. We didn't realize Rudy was about to become this, like, NBA Defensive Player of the Year caliber player. We knew he was good, but, like, remember, he didn't even play in the Clippers series hardly at all that the Jazz won right before Gordon Hayward left. So, to that point, we didn't know Donovan Mitchell was going to be that good.
Yeah.
So, what if you do get the number 1 overall pick and, like, Cooper's just really good right away? Or what if Dylan Harper's as good as Donovan Mitchell was year 1 and you just get the Rookie of the Year? And it's like, okay, then you're winning games. Like, the Jazz weren't expecting, when they traded Donovan and Rudy, to come out and have Walker Kessler, Kelly Olynyk, Mike Conley, and Larry Markkinen gel perfectly. And they did. So I wish I could name, like, one thing that we wouldn't expect. Yeah. But it's like, it could be Keontae George taking the jump of, like, oh, his 40% from the floor went to 45%, and he's taking 8 threes again and shooting 36%. It's like, well, there's just too many points on the board.
Yeah.
Or the Timberwolves miss the playoffs, or whatever, they make the playoffs as the 8th seed. You get the 17th pick, and you do get a Jaime Jaquez or a Donovan Mitchell that's drafted in the middle of the first round, or a Kawhi Leonard or a Klay Thompson. It's just like, the league is full of new things happening all the time. And so it's hard to predict, like, what would change that. Can you artificially hold that back? Yes, you can. You can artificially lose games. The Jazz are doing it right now to make sure you have a good lottery pick. But, like, if they don't like the buying price, the buying price right now for Larry Markkinen, if they feel like it's not high enough and they run it back with him, and you get the Rookie of the Year, and one of the young players takes a leap, and Walker continues to play at, a top 10 center level, it's like, at some point you're just good.
Yeah.
You're just kind of accidentally good. So I think there's a lot of possibilities.
And I want your opinion on this. The last two, now that the Jazz are finally in the top half of the lottery, right? The last 2 years they were in the bottom half of the lottery. And even then there was the talk with the front office talking about big game hunting and all this stuff. I never really expected the Jazz to go out and trade for a Luka Doncic, or let alone a top 20 player in the NBA. Now that the Jazz, and I feel like because of that, I more or less knew or had a range for where I expected the Jazz to fall. Now that they are going to get that top 5,
6 pick at worst.
Yes.
Yeah, top 6 pick at worst.
Now they're going to get that top pick. I have no clue where next year could go. They could make a big trade. Maybe they get Flagg or Ace Bailey or one of these guys, and like you say, they come in and are immediately awesome in their rookie year. And even you said earlier in the year, I wish I knew exactly what game it was, but it was a game where the Jazz looked really good and they had most of their guys playing. And you're like, just add Cooper Flagg to this lineup and see what happens.
Yeah.
There is so much potential in both directions for the Jazz next year.
Right, and I don't know how they feel internally. Like, if they land Cooper, do they feel like, okay, well, now we've got the green light to start over entirely? Like, this is it. We've got the central piece. Forget everybody else on the roster. We've got the guy. We're going to do everything we can to build around him. And the best thing to do is to have a top 3 pick next year and draft a Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson, and A.J. DiBonsa to fit next to them? Or is it to go the opposite direction and say, like, oh, man, we got our guy. Like, let's run.
Yeah.
Because you're only going to have 8 years of him or whatever it is. And I'm not saying this guy's going to ask for a trade. I'm just saying, like, that's how long you're guaranteed to have him under contract.
Yes.
So why waste a year? Like, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot. So there's so many butterfly effects that could change this for the Jazz. All signs, again, point to the Jazz being bad again next year. They do. changes quickly.
The
league changes in a weekend. It
Yes.
changes really, really quickly. Someone becomes available. You've got Cooper Flagg, and all of a sudden you've got 2 stars and you're off and running. So there's a million things that could change it.
Next question from Patrium Freedom Eagle. Do you know if the Jazz did anything for that guy that traveled from Finland to watch Lowry play last night, only to find Lowry out with an illness? That was brutal to see on the Jumbotron at the game.
And I will, from everything I've been told, it's like Lowry's very legitimately sick. This is not like the Jazz are doing shenanigans to get around the NBA's injury report. Like I've heard he's sick. He's like really sick. So I get why he's not there, and you don't want to get everybody else sick. I did see that guy on the Jumbotron. I don't know if they did anything. Jazz are usually pretty good about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like Ryan Smith does his, if you're like 90 years or older, like he gets you to a Jazz game. And he gives you a jersey that's like personalized with the number of your age when you go there. Like, in fact, I met a 96-year-old guy the other day who was there for that exact reason. So, like, the Jazz are usually pretty good about taking care of that stuff. And then when it gets shown on TV or the Jumbotron, it's like they're not hiding from it. You know what I mean? Like, Lowry wasn't there. So I would imagine, I would hope so. But I honestly don't know. Maybe by bringing attention to it, we will force their hand.
True.
Someone gets something.
I think that's it for questions. I will say, when we're back next Monday, I think Jazz are going to be back at 30th.
Yeah, I think the Jazz are going to have the worst record in the NBA, or at least tied for the worst when we get back. I'm with you. I get it. This was a weird week for the Jazz. Like, this was kind of a nothing week. Jazz players were exhausted after the game yesterday. There was, not checked out, but like 10 games left. Everyone is like very clear there's 10 games left. Like they see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know they're fighting it. I know Will Hardy is fighting that and trying to not fall into that trap. But I think it's a very realistic situation where you kind of just have to look at the end.
Yeah.
And like, look, the playoff teams are looking for the playoffs already. Like, they're a little bit checked out on the regular season too because it's such a grind. Quickly, we got one more question.
Okay.
So I want to address this from Jake the Lynx. He asked on Blue Sky, currently, how many first-round picks is Kyle Filipowski better than from last year's draft? I'll pull it up, and I'll just sort it by... we'll just do something simple. We'll do sorted by win shares per 48 minutes, which is...
Okay.
I don't believe in some of these stats.
Yeah.
Because, look, I'll tell you what's wrong. And I will get rid of Cam Spencer being number 1 overall because he's only played in 18 games.
Yeah.
Zach Edey's at 1. Quentin Post is 2. Khalil Ware is 3. Klingen's 4. Seems like they like big guys.
Yeah.
AJ Mitchell's 5. Adem Bona's 6. Again, Adem Bona plays for the 76ers. They're atrocious. Baylor Shireman again. It's like, other than Adem Bona playing for the 76ers, most of these guys are just on good teams.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, their teams win games. So no surprise. Donovan Klingen, that does not apply to. Jalen Tyson, he barely plays for Cleveland, has been hurt a lot of the year. Terrence Shannon Jr., who plays for Minnesota, again, is good. And then Flip's up there. So Flip right now is at number 11.
Okay.
I don't think Flip's actually been better than Yves Missi.
Yeah.
He's just been a better player this year. I don't know if he's actually been better than Ron Holland. Maybe he has. Ron just had a big game the other day. Some of these guys you go down the list of, and no, I don't actually think, he's better than, like, I didn't mention Steph Castle.
Yeah.
Like, Steph Castle's better than Kyle Filipowski is.
Yes.
And is going to be better than Kyle Filipowski. I actually think Alex Sarr's been better than Kyle Filipowski.
Yeah.
So if you were to go back and do a redraft, where would he go? Like 15?
Yeah. Like late lottery, if not early in the second half of the first round.
There's another popular basketball podcast that's like a nationwide podcast that was in town, not Windy, Bontemps, and McMahon. Not those guys, not the Hoop Collective, but one of the other ones. And we were sitting at dinner before the game, and we were talking about, like, drafting Kyle Filipowski.
Yeah.
And I was like, I went back to the 2013 draft, and basically I called it the Kelly Olynyk conundrum, which is whoever it was, Celtics or whoever it was who drafted Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah.
Take him at 11. And Giannis goes at 15. So everyone says, of course, well, you should have taken Giannis at 11.
Yeah.
Well, nobody knew Giannis was going to be that good.
Yeah.
And for every Giannis, how many Ousmane Jangs are there that are just not NBA players that get drafted hoping they're going to be the next Giannis, and they just simply never make it?
Yep.
So do you take the 12th best player with the 12th pick, knowing that they're never going to be better than the 12th best player from that draft, but 12th best player from every draft historically is a good player. Like, go back and you're like, well, that guy played for a decade and was helpful on the right team and had some trade value and, like, played a role, was in the top 8 rotation. Do you take that guy at 12 every year, or do you have to swing for the fences? And of course, sometimes you have to swing for the fences, but like a great batting average if you got the 12th best player at 12th every year. Now, the problem is the Jazz drafted Kyle Filipowski 32nd. They got the 12th best player at 32, so it's a grand slam home run, right? Like you got a rotation-level player. I think Flip's going to be around for a long time with the 32nd pick, who was Simone Fontecchio, who you pulled off the scrap heap, who barely plays in Detroit now. Yeah. It was a great trade for the Jazz. It was a great execution of what a front office is supposed to do to increase the value of assets. So I would go back and say Flip is probably going to be the 15th best player from this draft, 12th best player from this draft. He's not better than Jared McCain. He's not better than Ron Holland. He's not better than some of the names I've mentioned. Or maybe Dalton Knecht ends up a better player. I didn't mention him yet.
Yeah.
But, like, man, he's going to be a lot better than a lot of these guys.
Yes.
So half the first-round picks?
Yeah.
Which is really good. You did a really good job, Jazz. That was, and maybe Cody doesn't turn into a player. Like, maybe Cody's out of the league in 4 years. It's possible. I'm not betting on that, but it's very possible. And you still got a guy who's, around his level of draft pick at 32. So that's the value of why you want to have so many draft picks. And it is a little bit kind of counter to the Jazz making the trade with the Suns that they did earlier this year, where they traded 3 late firsts for a potential lottery pick from the Suns in 2031. I get why the Jazz did it, but at some point, like, just swings at the bat are a good option, because sometimes you hit on Kyle Filipowski even if you miss it number 9. Just because you get a top 5 pick potentially from Phoenix and it may never get there doesn't mean you're getting a good player.
True.
So maybe just having 3 options or having 3 chances to get a guy ends up being more beneficial. The reason the Jazz did it is because they have 3 picks in all of those drafts already. So they were ready to move off of some of them, so they didn't keep bringing on guys and end up having to miss them. All right. Thank you for the late question. Sorry to drag on the podcast a little bit awkwardly at that point. We will be back with you again next week. There will only be 2 weeks left in the NBA season. The Jazz will have something like 6 games left. So we will be really close to the end and continue to break it down. Of course, we're going to carry this all the way into the summer, through the lottery, through the draft, etc.
Speaking of the lottery, kind of jumping this on you a little bit, we had talked about it, but I think it's all but confirmed now. We will be doing a live Jazz Notes podcast on the day of the draft lottery, which is May 12th.
So I'm going to do some writing before that's ready to publish.
Yes.
And then you and I will be doing a live reaction show, or maybe a reaction right after, but we will make sure it's available for you. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
All right. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next week. We'll be back with you. Thanks.